All right, good evening. Back in the garage, just starting part 4 of the Alfa Romeo Veloce Spider, the 1981 Spider, winter projects list. And we're going to be putting the gas tank back in this evening. So a little bit of Tetris to play to get that back in. We are going to be using the strip caulking on the bottom of edges, or the bottom flange of the tank, as it came from the factory with a sealant around the bottom flange. So we'll get that set back in there hopefully fairly easily, and then we'll work on redoing the fuel lines and the emission lines to the tank. Alright guys, the tank went back in nicely, so it's nice not to have to fight gravity and the added weight of that little bit of fuel I had left in the tank while I was pulling it out. So it's dropped down and sealed nicely. We've got the Phillips screws back in around the perimeter where they need to be. So we're now in the process of just changing some of the fuel lines out and some of the emissions lines out. And again, we've got that kit from HPSI to work with back here. So we'll go ahead and we'll start that now. All right, guys, just picking up where we left off. And we were just installing that hose kit from HPSI in the trunk here. And I've just completed it, so we've got all new emissions lines. So we've got all brand new silicone emission lines running up through the car. We've got a little check valve here, a little one-way valve here. So those hoses look great. We've got brand new fuel lines. This is the vent actually for the tank here. This is the line to the electric fuel pump that comes out the top of the tank. And this is the return line over here. So that's looking great. It's always good to have fresh new lines. We are saving all of the old bits just for reference. There they are there, all bagged and tagged. So I think what we're ready to do now is we're ready to put the top back on the tank. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now. All right, we've got the trunk looking good. All the new lines are run, tucked away as they should be. The only line we still have left to connect is the electric pump for the tank. And once we get that new pump in, we'll hook that pipe up and that will be good for that. We'll reinstall the carpet and we'll call the trunk area good. I believe Doc said he's got some new elastics coming for, this is the jack back here, and you can see the two elastics that hold that together have perished, and I think Doc has ordered some new elastics for that, so we'll install those before we put the carpet kit in. Other than that, it looks good, so let's move on to another project. Alright, the next project is up on the bench. If you recall from a previous episode where we removed the road wheels and the hubs and bearings from the front, and we have new replacement bearings and seals to go in there. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I've just spent a little bit of time with a wire brush on a drill, just cleaning up the rotors a little bit. They are still within spec as far as thickness is concerned. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to clean the interior of the hubs out, get rid of all that old nasty grease that's in there. We're going to remove both races. We're going to install new races, and then we'll go on to installing new bearings and get that on the stub axle. All right, we've got the interior of the hub all cleaned out and no more of that old grease in there. And you can probably just see the lip of the outside race. This is the inner race here. That is the outer race. That's the front of the hub. And you can just probably see the edge of it there. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a drift to drift that out. So just got a punch here. We're just going to strike it around the edge carefully and just go round and round, and we'll remove that, and then we'll flip it over and we'll do the same for the inner race here. When we go to reinstall, we've got brass punches for that so as to not damage the new race, but to get the old races out, we're just going to be using a steel punch, and just be careful. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now, and we'll bring you back when those are out. Alright, there's the outer race out, and let me see if I can sort of set you up here with the flashlight. So you'll notice that there are two sides. So the flat side here is the side that comes into the hub. So it bottoms out on the inside here versus the outer flange, which is here. So just so you know, so that's exactly how I've punched it out. And you can see a little bit of the grease left on the back side of it. So the outside is out, and we'll go for the inner race now. Alright guys, there's the inner race just ready to come out, so we'll just lift that out. So there you go, again, flat side down, so that just fits in there. So we're going to go and work on installing the new races now. Alright, I've broken out my race and seal installation kit, and this has various size dies, I guess you can call them, for the tool. I've picked out the two appropriate ones. It's 2.325 for the inner and 1.750 for the outer. Again, if you don't have this, you can carefully use a brass punch as mentioned to tap them in around the circumference evenly, and try not to mark them up. So a couple different ways to do it, but since we have the kit, we're going to go ahead and utilize it. All right, we've got the inner and outer bearings here, the new ones from Centerline. Now obviously they can be purchased pretty much anywhere. I got them directly from Centerline. So here is the inner bearing number, and they are SKF bearings. There's another number on the box for reference. Again, you can get these at any regular, auto parts store if you wanted to. Here is the outer bearing and race, and there is the number on that box for reference. So we're going to go ahead, like I mentioned, and we're going to put the inner race in first, then we'll put the outer race in, and then we'll bring you back. All right, we're about to get messy. We've got our wheel bearing chassis grease here, and we've got our hubs that are nicely cleaned. So we're just going to pack these with grease, again about 2.5 ounces, and then we will move on to the next step once we've got these packed. All right, the insides of the hubs are greased nicely, so the next step is to grease the actual bearing itself. So we're going to do the old grease in the palm of the hand trick, and we'll force it into the bearing, and then we'll drop that in. We'll come back once that's completed before we go to the next step, which is adding the grease or oil seal. All right, the bearings are now greased, so we're on to our grease seals / oil seals. So they will go in this way. The spring will actually go on the inside. So what we'll do is we'll just grease this lightly on the inside, then we'll turn our race tool around and we'll use this as a driver for the seal, and we'll just tap that in, and we'll move on to the outer bearing. And just a quick shot of those oil / grease seals installed, and they look good. They're nice and flush with the rear of the hub, so all is good there. So we're just about to flip this over and work on the outer bearing. We're going to get that greased up and ready to go on to the next step as well. All right, the hubs are ready to go back on the car, so the next thing for us to do is to grab our grease and apply a little bit to the spindle before we put the hub and rotor assembly back on. Got our components ready to go here. We're going to grab our torque wrench, which we've got set over there, and we'll come back when we do the first step of setting the bearing end float. All right, the spindle has been greased, so now it's time to apply the rotor and hub assembly. And like I said, we'll break out the torque wrench, and remember, reverse threads on this side, driver's side, so opposite of what you're normally accustomed to. All right, we've got the D-washer and the nut on, and we're going to proceed to torque this down to 17 foot-pounds or 23 Newton meters. My smallest torque wrench is in Newton meters, so just done the conversion. So remember, a reverse thread, hopefully your torque wrench will click on the reverse setting. And then what we're going to do after we torque that down to 17 foot-pounds, we're going to back it off a couple of flats, and then we're going to retorque it to 7 foot-pounds, and I'll have to check the Newton meter reading for that, but I think it's around 10 off the top of my head. So then we'll retorque it to 7 foot-pounds, then we'll back that off 90 degrees, and we'll add the split pin. We want to make sure that there's still a little bit of movement in the D-washer after we do our final torque. All right, guys, all buttoned up. We've got the split pin, cotter pin put back in, spinning freely, and the D-washer can just turn a little bit. Not turn, but it's a little bit loose. So that is looking good. So time to put the grease cap back on, and then we can install the brake caliper and go on to bleeding the brakes. And before we put the brake caliper back on, we want to make sure that we spray the rotor down front and back with brake cleaner to remove any grease residue you might have left from your fingers. So that's important. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now before we reinstall the caliper. All right, we're going to use a little bit of blue Loctite on our caliper bolts that we have down there. One installed so far, and we're going to torque those down to 60 foot-pounds. All right, now that everything is back together, we are going to try and bleed the brakes. We're going to be using my vacuum bleeder system with the air compressor. We're just about to take the rear wheels off so we can get to the furthest side first, which will be the passenger side rear. Then we'll do the driver side rear, passenger side front, and then finally driver side front. That is the order of bleeding. So hopefully everything will go as planned and we won't have any issues. I have been reading on the forums that I believe some of the earlier cars are difficult to bleed. Hopefully this is not one of those cars. Anyway, we'll see what happens, and we'll see if the normal bleeding procedure that I've used pretty much on everything will work for this car. I'm hoping that it will, and that we don't have any issues to resolve. So wish me luck. We'll get those rear tires off and we'll start the process. Quick update for you. I'm just sitting here at the rear passenger side of the car, and I can tell you that the brakes successfully bled, and I've got a good pedal, so happy with that. While I had the rear wheels off, I took the opportunity to clean up the rotors back here and the brake caliper, and those are looking good. Just wanted to point out that often on these cars, when they have some age on them, the limit straps and the bump stops are missing or broken. And in this case, on this car, they are in good condition. So here is the limiting straps here, which are sort of bolted together. That limit strap limits how far the axle can droop or go down. So right now, since the car is on its axle stands, that axle is at full droop, so those straps are pretty tight. This at the top is called the bump stop, and that will limit the upward movement of the axle. So as the axle comes up, it'll hit the bump stop, and that will be the upper limit of the axle. Just thought I'd share that with you. All right, guys, we're going to call it a night out here in the garage. We're going to take the evening off and just relax. I just wanted to cross a few things off the list before I go. Number 4, the wheel bearings. Obviously, this episode encompasses those wheel bearings being changed out, so that is now crossed off. Number 5, the window tracks and switches is probably what I'll tackle next. I believe the window track mechanism is just fine. We'll just lubricate that. The switches need to be cleaned. They're a little bit temperamental as far as the power windows when they want to go up and down, and that's primarily the contacts and the switches that need to be cleaned. So we'll go ahead and do that next. Quarter light locks, just the driver's side needs to be reaffixed. I believe that's in the glove box. I'll have a look to see if that's there, but I need to buy some adhesive for that. The turn signal mechanism is actually on order, so it should be coming next week, I would think. So we'll endeavor to install that when that comes. I'm not sure how big of a project that's going to be, taking the steering column apart, but we'll get there when we get there. Tires is later date, seat repair later date, interior detail. That's probably coming up like mid-December-ish, somewhere around there. As far as add-ons are concerned, the gas tank is now installed with all of the fuel lines and emissions lines in the trunk, so we're going to cross that off now. So the list is shrinking. We'll probably add a few more items as we go along here, but there is the list as of today. All right, guys, we'll call the night out here as mentioned, and we'll see you back out here tomorrow. Thanks for watching, thanks for commenting, and as always, thanks for subscribing.